I think we'll just make a start, and anybody who joins us late can pick up the conversation wherever we are. Okay, so yeah, a big welcome and good afternoon to everybody who is here. Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks for joining us at what we realise is a pivotal moment, really, for the whole of the higher education sector. For those who don't know me, as you can see, my name's Anna Brady. And I'm here facilitating this conversation today with Sir Rob Behrens, who's also on the call, and you should be able to see. And we've called the webinar today "From Crisis to Transformation: Strategies for University Leaders and Managers." And we've brought Rob along as somebody who's been pivotal in leading transformation in public services and the higher education sector throughout his career, to really allow you to benefit from his experience and insights, and hopefully take away some practical strategies that you can apply to your own work. But at Code Switch, for those of you who aren't aware of our organisation, we have been set up now for about 5-6 years. We're in our 6th year, and we help researchers, professional services staff, and leaders in the higher education sector to build their skills, drive change, and turn ideas into action through training, mentoring, and consultancy services. And today we just want to really have this conversation with Rob and reflect really honestly on what it takes to lead and deliver true transformational change. And more specifically, how to do this with fairness, integrity, and transparency, which are all values that Rob has really championed throughout his career. And I had the benefit of witnessing and learning from through working with Rob at the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman for a number of years. So for those of you who are navigating change or supporting those who do, which I'm sure applies to most of you at the moment, like I say, we really hope that you're going to leave here with some insights that you're going to be able to apply to your own work wherever you are. Because obviously in higher education at the moment, there are a lot of very real challenges and complexities and uncertainties. And actually the idea for today's conversation came about following the publication of a recent report from Universities UK and their Transformation and Efficiency Task Force. I'm not sure how many of you have seen or read that report, but it's called Towards a New Era of Collaboration. And the report recognises that UK universities are facing pressures on every front at the moment. Obviously, we're all aware of the financial constraints, reduction in investments in core teaching, in core research. And as this report highlights, actually potentially a regulatory system which generates its own barriers, a system that's geared more towards competition between universities rather than collaboration, even though that's what we're striving to do more of. But another thing that the report makes really clear and really highlights is that, you know, these cost-cutting initiatives alone aren't going to be the thing that saves us and that puts things right. And it calls for something much bolder in the form of transformational change, and change that's collaborative, people-centered, and grounded in good leadership and good governance. So it recognises that, you know, this transformational change that needs to happen across the higher education sector isn't simply a structural challenge. It's a very human challenge. And so it's asking us as leaders, as managers, as stewards of these kind of public facing, public serving institutions to act with fairness and clarity and courage. Obviously, when conditions are anything but clear. So that's what today's conversation is about. It's about learning from Rob and him, from his experience of trying to keep trust alive when trust is very much under pressure, and to lead ethically when, you know, resources are constrained, systems are fragmented, and change feels, you know, anything but possible, really. So yes, let me introduce our key guest here today. So we've absolutely delighted to introduce Sir Rob Behrens, who, like I said, is a real authority in leading change for good, I'd like to say, in public services and higher education services. And for those who've seen some of the information we've been putting out there online, you may have picked up that across Rob's career, he has helped to build a public sector in post-apartheid South Africa, receiving recognition from Nelson Mandela himself. He's delivered major transformations as the Independent Adjudicator for Higher Education in England and Wales, and also where I worked with Rob at the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. And he's also been awarded a CBE, as you can see, for services to higher education. So a really broad range of really valuable experience that we can all learn from at this critical time for higher education. And let's not forget that currently, Rob, I made the mistake when I contacted Rob of congratulating him on his retirement, and was quickly put right on that. Rob is not retired. He is currently the chair of governors at a university at Anglia Ruskin, Peterborough University. So a really broad range of experience that I think we can all benefit from. And like I said, I got to experience Rob's leadership firsthand, working together during his time as the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. And, we'll talk about this today, but, he really impressively and successfully corralled not only the internal staff groups, but also external collaborators and organisations within our jurisdiction that we were there to make decisions about, around a kind of core set of values, and reinvigorated that ecosystem, and really helped to develop trust and improve impact, and improve public services. And this was all in the face of having to achieve 24%, I believe it was, cost savings imposed by the Treasury, and all-time low levels of trust amongst staff and service users as well. So, we're going to explore with Rob how leadership behaviour really shapes culture and outcomes, and the recommendations of the UUK report around how we really need to develop leadership capability and behaviours, and think about the governance structures in place to enable us to achieve the transformation that's needed in the higher education sector. Just before I introduce Rob and invite him to start that conversation, I am just going to attempt to launch a poll, just to get us started. So it's a word cloud. If you wouldn't mind contributing your thoughts to this, just interested to know what one word best captures how your team or organisation is feeling right now. Okay, thank you to those who've responded. I can see we've got a number of responses. Okay, let's have a look at those results. Can everybody see those results on screen? Okay, I've got a few thumbs up. Don't think Tracy can. Okay, so what I'm seeing here, for those who can't see, is unsettled has come through as the main thing at the moment. Overwhelmed, surviving, anxious, insecure, untrusting, uncertain, worried. And we do have one positive. One person said that the team or organisation is feeling positive, which is great. Maybe we can hear a bit about what's driving that positivity later on. But this is probably not surprising to the majority of people here. And Rob, a situation that you're familiar with, going into an organisation with these types of feelings and trying to turn things around. So yeah, I wonder if, Rob, we could move to you now, and obviously as somebody who understands what it means to move into these environments, and when we talked initially, you talked about the importance of going into these environments with a leadership proposition, and to be able to come out of the other side with practical insights and honest reflections. So Could you tell us a bit more about what you mean, Rob, by a leadership proposition, and being clear on the leadership proposition that you take into these roles? What is it that you mean by that, and why is it so important?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's lovely to be with you, Anna, a person I highly respect and regard. And thank you to everyone for joining this conversation. The point of a conversation is there's no point. We're here to explore possibilities. And I don't want to pretend that every time I go into an organization, I have a magic touch and everything is okay. That's not the truth. That's not history. The world isn't like that. I've made lots of mistakes in my life. My wife will tell you many of them. But the point is that every adverse experience is a learning opportunity. This is very important. I can remember being a humble civil servant, and I was told by the secretary of a permanent secretary that I wasn't important enough to speak to him when I asked for a meeting. I can remember being told by my boss in the civil service that if she ever made a mistake, to come and tell her what she'd done wrong. And when I went to tell her what she'd done wrong on one occasion, she was absolutely furious with me and got rid of me as quickly as she can and didn't speak to me for several weeks. And for all of us, we have a bag in which we put things. It's better not to forget them. It's better to use them when we're in a situation where we can have some influence and change things. And I was determined when I became a leader that I would never put myself in the situation where people thought that I was rude or insensitive and not listening. They might not agree with me, but they couldn't say that I didn't listen or engage with them. And I think that's the first proposition in leadership, that you go into an organization at whatever level and you listen to the people who are your colleagues and work with. And if you don't listen, you lose so much possibility of changing things in a proactive way. So I just give you two examples of that. The first time I went to PHSO, the National Ombudsman, they were a bit nervous of me. They didn't allow me to speak at the annual staff seminar. They allowed me to have a question and answer session. And one guy stood up and he said, "Look, you're asking us to do a very difficult job, but you don't give us professional development and training. If you don't do that, we won't be able to do what you want to do." And I remembered that, and I knew it was true on the basis of the research that we did, that you have to give people the professional development they need in order to do their job properly. And I think without that, without accepting that we have leaders at all levels of the organization, but they need professional development, that's very important. And the second thing, as part of the leadership proposition, is that in 2017, together with my chief executive, we held meetings with every member of staff. So there were over 500 at that point, and we had a discussion about the values and aims of the organization. And I remember this, it was horrible. 9 people out of 500 could name what the values of the organization were. And that showed to me that we had to rebrigade, we had to talk about values and objectives. And if you survive in that way, it's because of the integrity of people in the organization, not because of its values. So values are very important. And the third proposition is this, that in my time as National Ombudsman over 7 years, the biggest thing I came across was the rotten culture which exists principally in the health service, but also in other parts of public administration. And it seems to me that if you don't recognize the importance of what you called it before, public trust, in getting on the right track, which is about honesty, transparency, it's about trusting people, being trustworthy, but it's also about competence. If you don't accept those four things, you're not going to change your organization. And more important, Anna, you're not going to be able to change other organizations because they'll say, well, you say that, but you don't do it yourself. So this is very important that you have to prepare for being criticized by taking preemptive steps.
Yeah, and I remember that very well, Rob. So I joined the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman just a short time before you, maybe a year. And I remember coming into an organisation as part of a project team that was tasked with doing things a little bit differently. It was essentially a pilot. So people were testing whether things could be done, quicker, more cheaply, in a slightly different way. And we in the project team all had a great time. We were off in a different building to the rest of the organization, had no idea what was going on there in the main organization, and how upset people were, and how untrusting people were, because they really weren't told about what was going on here. So all people saw was something was going on over here. A whole load of new people have been brought in. We know they're doing the same kind of work as we are, but we don't know what they're doing or how they're working or who they are. So whereas we were having a great time over there and had our own kind of culture, it was quite a different scenario for those people who'd been working for the organization for a long time. And I clearly remember you coming into the organization and doing that big piece on co-creating the organization's vision and values to really start that foundational work in getting people corralled back around the core values, around the mission driven nature of the organization and what we were all there for, and therefore what our key strategic objectives needed to be for that first part of your tenure. And it was fascinating, actually. And although obviously it wasn't the only thing that you needed to do to get people on board, and it was a continuous process, it was certainly a really impressive and different approach to what had been taken in the organization prior to that. So what did you find in going through that process of having to really define our vision and our values and trying to get people on board? And what were your key, obviously we've talked about your leadership proposition. How did you then sort of bring that to life alongside, the rest of the leadership team? And how did you continue to drive that forward throughout, your tenure as the ombudsman?
Yeah, I mean, I think just before I get into that, silos are a big problem in organizations, particularly in universities, in my experience. That universities are full of really good people, but they're often paddling their own canoe and they're not connected with each other. And I think that's particularly true of the relationship between governors and people who work in the institution, and between academics and non-academics. So it's not just about wider public service organizations. But as far as creating change is concerned, if you don't take stock and if you don't publish, at least to your own people, what you found about what's wrong and where you want to go, you don't have a hope of changing things. And I think in every job that I've done, I've always commissioned a founding external review of the organization, sometimes repeated during the course of my tenure, to spell out the elephant in the room. What is there, which people know about, but often don't acknowledge. And if you don't do that, I think you're in trouble in terms of your credibility and people understanding where you want to go. So at the Higher Education Ombudsman, I commissioned the Pathway Report, which was an interactive attempt to get people to say what they thought about the higher education ombudsman service. So using stakeholders to tell us what they thought. I did that when I was complaints commissioner to the bar, where we discovered from external research that 80% of barristers thought we were excellent and 10% of complainants thought we were excellent. So there's something wrong there. And if you didn't put that out there, then it wasn't going to work. And most happily, when I became higher education ombudsman, we took stock, we set out our ambitions, but along the way, we commissioned peer reviews for the first time, independent peer reviews using our counterparts in other countries to tell us what they found when they came into the organization and had a free rein. Now, that is quite scary, Anna. There's nothing worse than bringing in people to scrutinize your organization and them saying to you, go away, we want to talk to the staff in private and we don't want you interfering in that, so that we can really find out what's happening. That is so important, to trust people, to give them an opportunity to speak so that you can set out where you want to go and how you go there. And you don't just do it at the beginning, but you keep doing it in order to win people's understanding. There's one other point I want to make. Communication is at the very heart for all of us. So, as you know, the Ombudsman Service is based in Manchester and in London. And when I first joined the Ombudsman Service, a bomb went off in Manchester at a big concert very close to our building. And people were told to go home and not to come back to work until it was declared to be safe. And the next morning, 90% of people came into the office because of their commitment. And I was there and I went around the office thanking people and talking to them for what they had done. And people said to me, that's extraordinary for you to do that. And I said, no, it's not. It's basic people decency. It's showing respect to people when they put themselves out for the organization. And throughout my tenure, I may not have been very bright. I may have got lots of things wrong, but people could never say I didn't talk to them or listen to them. They wanted to hear me. They wanted to see me. They didn't want to be deferential. And leaders have to engage both internally and externally if they want to survive.
I can definitely resonate with that, Rob. And of course, having worked with you, confirm all of that to be true. You were very visible. You wanted your workspace and your office space to be there amongst the key operations staff. I can remember having many conversations with you over the time that we worked together, as can the majority of staff who've worked there. And I think another thing that really shone through was how approachable and personable you were. You always looked like the most relaxed man in the room, very calm under pressure, but at the same time steadfast in what you were there for, what you represented, and what we needed to deliver. And certainly in terms of those values of integrity, fairness, and transparency, they were always at the center of everything. And I think one reflection I had from being ultimately a manager in that environment was that it really enabled having the clarity of the values and the vision and the mission, which obviously then leads to better conversations amongst the leadership team and the executive team around strategic objectives. All of that filters down throughout the organization and makes your job as a manager. And at the time I was managing the program management office. So I was working closely with the strategy team in translating that strategy into actionable plans. And it made it very easy for us to understand, the priorities and how we needed to prioritize the resources, the time and the work around the vision, the values, and the strategic objectives. So I think it really helped to mold and drive forward the whole organization. And of course, things change. We have different financial constraints, different things in the external environment change, which change our priorities. But it gave us that framework for having those discussions around what those changing priorities were, and like I say, a very clear framework because of that clarity at the top of the organization. So that's my reflection, I think, on working within that environment with you.
Can I just say a number of things to build on that? First of all, if you want to have leaders at all levels of your organization, you've got to give them the power to be able to do things that they want to do if it's agreed that it's a sensible thing. And too often in organizations that I've gone into, people have been constrained by being told that's out of their remit and they can't do that. Secondly, the worst thing for us is to want to be loved in our organizations. You cannot be a strategic leader and be loved, because you're making difficult decisions and you're going to disagree with people. And sometimes you're going to have to ask people to step aside if they're not up to it, after all the opportunities you give them to develop. And so if you want to be loved, you go somewhere else, you do something else, you become a rock star. But that is very important. The second thing is, there are so many opportunities for universities and trusts in the health service and departments to learn from what's going on in counterpart organizations. And it tends not to happen. And I survived as an ombudsman for 7 years for two reasons. One is that I learned from how my counterparts did it better and stole their ideas. But secondly, in relation to that, I found consolation with leaders of other organizations in getting together to share the difficulties in a way which was reassuring, to know that you weren't going mad, to know that this was generally a problem. But learning from, I did a study for the Ombudsman of 58 national Ombudsman services in 38 countries at the height of COVID. And this was one of the best things that I ever did, because I learned so much. We learned so much about what are the key issues going forward from COVID and how to engage with service users in a way which respects them, which I didn't get from the United Kingdom. And I think we tend to be very ethnocentric in the UK about thinking we know about things. It's part of the political rhetoric. We don't have to be good. We have to be the best in the world, according to politicians. Well, if that is to be the case, you genuinely need to have an information base which looks at what other people do and learns from that, which is why events like these are so important, from anybody at any time.
That's really interesting, Rob. So just to pick up on a couple of those points, you've talked about giving people the power to act and make decisions. And in an organization like the Ombudsman, where we work together, at least in PHSO, that concept of delegation of authority is quite well understood, because essentially the Ombudsman is the person who has the power to make these final decisions on a certain situation. But of course, it's not you as the Ombudsman who's going to look at all of the evidence and actually formulate those decisions. So that your power has to be delegated to the people doing the casework and the casework managers and what have you. And we in the program management office, as program change managers, project managers, also use that concept in terms of delegating down decisions to the right level of an organization to get things done. But of course, this is something that's been highlighted as well by the UUK report as something that needs to potentially change within higher education. So I wonder if there's any transferability of our work, in the Ombudsman and the very practice of schemes of delegation, which can be transferred and shared helpfully with this audience?
Well, happily, universities don't have the principle of corporation sole, which the Ombudsman has, which makes the Ombudsman responsible for absolutely everything that goes on in the organisation, which is mad and crazy, and means that every year the Ombudsman gets battered by a select committee scrutinising what's happening. But there are two big things that I draw out from this excellent UUK report, which I think are worth reflecting on and discussing. The first is that training and professional development is something which is lacking in our public service and is also lacking in our universities. And if you don't give people the professional skills that they need, then you're going to be in trouble in terms of moving forward. And the health service hasn't got that right. Public administration hasn't, and neither have universities. So if you're an academic, it tends to be assumed you don't need further professional training. And there is a dearth of training for non-academics in higher education, which is not fair. And they are the great resource which needs professional development. The other thing is governance. I would have thought that higher education governance was crazy if I didn't go to health service governance first, which is even worse. It's complicated. The public don't understand it. But the role that boards in universities play in overseeing what vice chancellors do and what's going on in the university is absolutely crucial. And I know from my experience of boards in the health service that when there has been a big scandal, deaths of babies, for example, in East Kent, in Morecambe Bay, in Shrewsbury, the board of governors has looked the other way and didn't want to know what was going on. And that tends to happen in universities when there is a big crisis or a scandal. Sometimes this is historic with vice chancellors who have erred but haven't been called to account by their governing body. And I think it's incumbent upon governing bodies to be able to see the elephant in the room, to be interested enough to call people to give evidence from all parts of the university, not just the senior leaders of the organization. Otherwise, they won't really know what's happening. And just in relation to that, and I think actually Peterborough is run beautifully. It's a model of academic and non-academic leadership. But in general, for governors, they've got to get out and understand the university, not just attend regular board meetings, sometimes online. Because if they get out and meet people, then they can really find out what's going on.
Yeah, sure. And I suppose when it comes to governance as well, you can't have all the decision-making power held at the top of your organization. Otherwise, nothing's ever going to happen. Nothing's ever going to move. Things take too long. You're not able to respond in an agile manner. And yes, obviously the UK report is calling for some sort of reform or rethinking of the governance structure of universities to empower and enable people to make bolder decisions and to take action. And I guess, again, this is something that also needs to be kept under review because, circumstances do change. So I remember working, for example, for an organisation called Cash Access UK, which was effectively a startup, but funded by all the major banks, collaborating for the first time. So unsurprisingly, because the banks were coming together for the first time, there was a lot of discussion and negotiation around the governance arrangements there. And actually, to begin with, they were very risk averse. And we found that all of, in the document that was agreed with the lawyers, all of the decisions had to go up to more or less up to the top. But, as we sort of settled into clearer ways of working and as our, workload increased, we just couldn't do that. We can't send all the decisions to the top. We were facing delays and facing criticism. So it's something that does need to flex, I think, and be reviewed over time, depending on the internal and external factors, and of course the organisation's risk appetite. But in universities, Rob, what is it, do you think, that's working particularly well about the Peterborough model, and is it something that different, older, bigger institutions could adopt, or do you think that's unique to the sort of higher education institute that Peterborough is?
Well, I think we all need to learn from each other. In my experience, the role that the owner organisation, Anglia Ruskin University, has played has been exemplary, because the Vice-Chancellor has been enabling, generous, helpful, supportive. He hasn't behaved as if the new university is some upstart that needs to be watched very carefully. He's been generous and supportive, and I think that's very important. Secondly, the principal and chief executive, effectively the vice-chancellor of the new university, lives the values of the organization. He knows the students. He goes out to meet them. He knows the local community. He goes out to meet them in a way which is so important, because most undergraduates come from Peterborough itself, and there's no tradition of higher education in Peterborough. So this is a big change. It's not like other universities where people come from all over the country or the world. And I think if you have leaders who live the values, that is very, very important. But they also need people who work for them to emulate that as well. And I think, broadly speaking, there's a really good leadership team there.
That's really interesting, and actually some of what you're speaking about there reflects very closely the conversations that we have a lot when we're working with researchers, academics, professional services and others in higher education institutes, particularly thinking about roles that they may wish to move into. We always ask people to very closely examine their own values first. What's really, really important to you about what you do at work, or how you work, or the type of impact that you're having? And then to build into that your skills and experience and what you can offer to really start to understand your unique value proposition. And I guess that ties in with what you were talking about, a leadership proposition earlier on. I don't think that's just for leaders. Like you say, I think it needs to kind of be emulated and reflected throughout an organization. And ideally, you're going to have some staff around you, colleagues around you who share not exactly the same necessarily, but similar values, a diversity of strengths and experience, but you're all working towards similar outcomes and a similar mission.
We all in our professional roles have to get out more. The thing that I did when I was higher education ombudsman was I went to 100 universities to meet the vice chancellor, the president of the students' union, and to have access to walking around the campus and meeting people. And it was true in the health service as well. And what was common of both vice chancellors and leaders of trusts is that they would welcome me and say, we're all in this together, Rob. It's one happy family. And as soon as you go out and meet other people who are convinced that this is a private conversation, you find the story is very different in a lot of places. I can remember meeting the president of a students' union, and I asked him what he thought of his vice chancellor, and he said, to be honest, he's an absolute shed. And I was grateful for that, because it gave me an insight into what people felt rather than just the formal position. And I think that sometimes I was taken round campuses by vice chancellors who were very unsure where they were going because they didn't get out very regularly. So that's quite interesting as well.
It is interesting, and what you're saying there about the kind of private conversation as opposed to the public conversation, I guess, leads into another question that we have here. So, obviously, if you have given some thought to your values and your vision and your leadership proposition, that's all well and good and a great starting point. But how do you stay true to that when you head into crisis and when you're faced with a crisis situation, which oftentimes, let's face it, brings out our true colors or surfaces the true culture of a leadership team or of an organization. But Rob, I know that obviously during your time and different roles and the time that we shared together in PHSO, there are a number of crisis situations that you had to lean into. And I have to say, from somebody working in the organization, I didn't see a change in your behavior. I didn't see a major change in the way that you addressed the organization or in the key messaging. Obviously, certain things were addressed with more urgency, or you came to us to talk about what was happening and the priorities. But how do you stay grounded and true to your values, your vision, and your proposition when things get tough? And can you bring some of those crises to life for us?
Yeah. Well, I've spent my life getting into situations that I didn't really want to get into. So, when I was working on the South African transformation, my bosses in London were very cross with me for spending so much time in South Africa. And they distinguished between real work and going to South Africa, which was just frightening and so wrong. But that was the reality. But more strategically, the big crisis for me as the ombudsman was COVID, because as the health service ombudsman, the health service got absolutely battered. It closed down its complaints handling departments into bereavement. We had to suspend for 4 months our investigations into what was going on, which led to a big backlog. And then we had the really big issue of how to deal with a backlog in which people were very angry because for a number of months cases weren't being looked at. And we had lots of discussions and consultations and board meetings about what to do. And in the end, I made the very difficult choice that for less serious cases, we wouldn't investigate them if it took a lot of time to investigate, because we needed to focus on avoidable deaths and the very serious complaints. And a lot of people, a lot of citizens, a lot of complainants were angry about that. But for us, it was the only way in which we could make sense of the large number of cases which we needed to look at as a result of COVID. And I think in a crisis situation, a leader has always to listen, but stay true to their principles, to the 4 elements of trust which are there, and to be prepared to stand up for what they've said. So I remember that a number of people in the organization were very angry with me for doing that, and they came to tell me. And to me, that is a sign of success, because if people feel confident to be able to say what they really think, that gives the leader of an organization the opportunity to reflect, to decide whether or not to change their mind. You shouldn't stop listening in a crisis. That's a time when you do have to listen and to explain more what's going on. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think it's kind of brings to life this idea of tensions, the tensions of a leader. And actually, the UUK report talks about 7 structural tensions that universities are trying to hold. And I'm just looking at my notes here. So they talk about strategic versus operational, collaboration versus competition, and so on. And then you've got leadership experts who talk about sort of those personal tensions as well, of leadership kind of qualities. So teller versus listener, perfectionist versus accelerator, power holder versus power sharer. And I guess that's kind of the terrain of a leader, really, to kind of hold these tensions in balance and navigate between them, and of course moving veering slightly to one side or another, or maybe very firmly for one period of time holding, a power holding position versus another time when you might be more of a power sharer. But I think that kind of brings to life the importance of understanding some of the tensions and how to kind of navigate them and play with them a little bit in a careful way, obviously, depending on the context that you're in. You can't just be one thing to all people at all times. And I guess this goes to the principles of adaptive leadership, flexible leadership, which I know is something else that you've spoken about in the conversation that we had prior to the discussion today. So I can see it's coming up to 10 to 1 at the moment, so we have just more than 10 minutes left in the conversation, and it's been a great conversation so far, so thanks, Rob. And I wonder if in kind of reflecting on the UUK report and everything we've discussed today, what would be your, I suppose, key message for leaders, managers, and anyone working in universities today, in terms of how to work towards positive transformation together, holding values at the core, trust, collaboration, and all the good things that you've spoken about today?
I think there are four things. There's a trust index published by Ipsos Mori and other organizations about what people think are honest institutions and professionals in organizations. And that is salutary for us. So what it shows is that doctors and nurses are the most trusted people in professional life in the UK, and politicians, civil servants, and newspaper journalists are the least trusted. And if we can't be honest with the people that we work for, both as colleagues internally and externally, we have to give up. So you have to retain your honesty. It seems to be a small thing, but it is a very big thing. The second thing is, however much integrity we have to be competent. And if we're not competent, people will lose trust in what we're trying to do. So competence is not separate from trust. It's part and parcel of it. And it's no good having the trappings of power if you don't use them to the effective way you want to change things. Thirdly, and this is so important in universities and in hospitals, the culture in the organization needs to be strong and transparent and open. And any attempt to get in the way of that is an adverse step, however difficult the situation is. And I know of too many cases where leaders of organizations have harassed people for blowing the whistle, for telling the truth about what's going on, and tried to get rid of them, and have succeeded very often. And I think that's very bad, but it's still going on. And the last thing is what's called active trust. We all have to behave in ways in which encourages people to believe that you are a decent person who respects the other person that they're dealing with. Without reciprocal trust, we're going to get nowhere. And that applies to everybody in the organization, in dealing outside the organization as well as inside it. Now, that is very difficult because in the ombudsman world, you've got a lot of complainants whose behavior is frankly unacceptable. And you have to find ways of dealing with that, but you also have to find ways of supporting your staff in making sure that they don't lose out as a result of that unacceptable behavior. So those four things are absolutely fundamental in going forward.
Thanks, Rob. Really, really insightful. I do want to give people an opportunity to ask questions in the chat if you have any. So please go ahead and pop them in there if there is anything that you want to ask. But I think what I'm taking away from today is obviously the importance of values, which I'm sure we're all aware of. and in particular in times of change and uncertainty and difficulty, you know, that honesty and integrity at all levels of an organization, no matter who you're dealing with internally or externally. And I think it's key what you're saying there about leadership actually happening at all levels of an organization, and competence being a key component of that trust, integrity, and honesty. So regardless of what's going on in and around an organization, we probably need to find ways to support the development of and continued development of our staff, which is obviously difficult when there are financial constraints. But you know, how do we as leaders and managers ensure that that's still happening no matter what the financial situation is, and how do we keep that at the forefront of leadership's mind as well? I do remember actually just one final kind of example, working at PHSO. I think a good example of that was following on from your talks about vision and values and how we kind of co-created that. There was a huge emphasis from yourself and the leadership team, Rob, on improving the support and training and development of caseworkers and other staff to ensure that our outputs and the quality of casework was excellent and our communication was excellent. And we also wanted to start sharing that openly. So back to the transparency point, so that people could see, complainants could see what was going on, and organizations we were investigating knew what was going on. But equally, in my area of the business, when we set up the program management office and introduced a framework and tools and brought new people into the organization with experience of doing this, we kind of democratized that knowledge as far as we could. We created a handbook which we shared widely, put on events and training modules on project management and other core concepts of change management, which everybody was invited to across the organization, regardless of their role or involvement in the development and delivery of change. And they were attended by everyone, including leaders. So we would have members of the leadership team sitting along, people of all roles and levels of the organization. And I think that was a really powerful thing. So I completely agree with you on the training and development side of things, and looking for opportunities to break down those silos. I think training and development can be a good way of breaking down silos that you talked about earlier on. Okay, let me just check in the chat if we have any questions from the room. We have a few thanks for what we're doing today. You are very welcome, and apologies for people needing to leave a few minutes early, but no further questions from the room, Rob. So in that case, with just 5 minutes to go, I wonder if you wanted to make any closing remarks in terms of how universities, and from your role as a chair of governors of a university and your proximity to the challenges of the higher education sector today, any words of encouragement from your experience of moving through a crisis?
Two things. One is, last year I had a meeting with a complainant to try and persuade him that we'd done our best for him. And it lasted an hour and a half. At the end of it, he said, he stood up and he said, "Mr. Behrens," he said, "before I met you, I thought you were a complete idiot. Now, I'm not quite sure." And that really, to me, sums up the situation, that we're never going to be thanked for what we do, but that shouldn't stop us from trying to do it. And I think that is very important. The second thing is, I've worked in Ukraine, in South Africa, in Eastern Europe, where we don't know how lucky we are in comparison in terms of freedom of access, universities able to operate normally, and without an authoritarian government so far. And we need to celebrate that. You know, it is very difficult for us and for people. I don't underestimate the times that people are going through. But in comparison with what's happening in Kyiv or Gaza or somewhere like that, we're lucky, and we should seize that opportunity.
Thank you, Rob. Well, thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your insights. today. I know that I have really enjoyed that and benefited from talking to you firsthand, and I hope other people in the room have as well. I wonder if I can just invite those who are left to close with one final poll or word cloud, should I say. So just interested to know actually if there's one thing you could take away from the conversation today, whether that's an insight, an increase in outlook, or some sort of positive action. What's one thing that you're going to take away from today's conversation? Okay, just a couple of responses there. No, oh, here we go. A couple more coming through. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. It's great to see that some of the core themes of the discussion are coming through. So yes, transparency, big one for you, Rob, I know. Openness to talk, importance, and I believe somebody has shared one on the chat as well. Let's have a little look. Importance of getting out and about, which is another key message. And yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. As a manager, I've actually followed what I saw you do there in the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, Rob, and really carried that with me. It did make a huge difference to understanding what's going on out there, and to increasing trust and visibility. It's quite obviously it takes a bit of time, but it's an easy one to do if you can find the time and means to get out and about. So that's great. I can see we've got one more message coming through, I believe. But yes, no, that just leaves me to say thank you so much to our guest, Rob. It was lovely to see you and talk to you again, and to everybody else who attended today and stayed with us to the end. Thank you very much. And, we stand with you. We understand what you're all going through at the moment, and I'm sure there will be brighter days for higher education just around the corner. Just try and hold true to your values, and we will get there. So thanks all. Enjoy the rest of your day.